Good evening, everybody. Welcome to tonight's overview and scrutiny meeting. Just a reminder, of course, as per usual, that the meeting is being recorded, so please bear that in mind with any comments that you wish to make. I've had an absolute nightmare getting here this evening, so make it good. Thank you, everybody. First off on our agenda, we have the minutes of the previous meeting held on the 22nd of November 2022. Seems an age away now. Members, can I get your approval to adopt those minutes? Is anybody opposed? Lovely, thank you, everybody. I'll sign those. There you go. Next, item 2, apologies.
I've received apologies from Councillors Benton, Mrs Kay Perry, Mr R Perry, Councillor Steele, Councillor Sutton and Councillor Upton.
Lovely, thank you, Karen. So that's apologies. Next, we move on to declarations of interest, bearing in mind the agenda items tonight. Anyone wish to declare any interests? Can't see anybody signalling. We don't have anything interesting. Okay, so we can move on to the meat of the agenda tonight, which is the MTFS report. So we'll get on with that. This is on pages 3 to 44 of your document pack. I'd like to hand over to Deputy Leader, Councillor Heseltine, to introduce this item, please. Rita.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. It's important to remember that this MTFS briefing is part of the wider consultation period. As members, you will have seen all of these options in prior updates, but tonight's briefing pulls together all the savings and pressures, including the local government settlement, which was issued in December. With this in mind, I'll now hand over to Peter Shakespeare.
Thank you and good evening, members. As just outlined, this is currently out for consultation at the moment, so tonight's briefing forms part of that consultation period. So we really welcome your views and comments on the reports before you. We've pulled together a presentation which picks out the pertinent parts of the quite a detailed report that that's been circulated. I'll go through the report, pause as we go through, and then obviously happy to take any questions either as we go through and I pause each area or at the end of the presentation. So first of all, just a reminder to all members that all of tonight's what's been presented is underpinned by our plan and the 5 key pillars of that. So we'll do a quick economic update on where we are and how the economy is looking. Very briefly look back to the local government settlement that came out in December of 22, and then we'll get into the meat of this evening, which is the budgetary assumptions, what the MTFS looks like over the coming 5 years and the impact that will have on our general fund. So in terms of a brief economic update, members will have seen this slide when it comes through in a moment. Before. Bit of a delay. To work. Die. Second, I'm sorry. £50p for the motor. On Teams. Well, members, I'm just going to share it on Teams and we'll do it a different way so you can see. Oh, to come up. We'll keep going until it fades again. So, very brief economic update. GDP, you hear about in the news all the time at the moment. If we look back to when we did this briefing in November with you, we were forecasting entering into a period of recession. And if you remember, there was one line that was still showing growth. That was the OBR forecast, the green line, and we were waiting desperately for that to be updated. Since we last met, that has been updated. They've come into line with all other major economists and their forecasts, and that is that the UK is about to enter a period of recession. It was expected towards the end of 2022. It was narrowly avoided with a 0.1% growth, but there's general consensus that in 2023 we will enter recession, and that's across the board. A little bit of a delay coming through. Looking to inflation, again in the news at the moment. There is a chart there, I promise you, members. It's inflation over the last few weeks has just started to ease back a little bit, but what you'll see through the rest of the presentation is it's a real major driver and has real long-lasting effects on the budget for us as an authority moving forward for this next 5-year period. So while RPI and CPI are hitting extremely high rates, we're still around the 10% to 12% mark for RPI. We are just starting to see that tail off a little bit. You'll see that in your personal lives with the cost of fuel, etc., coming down. We expect that energy costs will also start to ease as we enter into the first and second quarter of this year. Very briefly looking at consumer confidence, graphs I've shown you before. Again, it continues to be historically low, even back in September when the energy scheme was announced by the government. They expected to pick up consumer confidence. It actually dropped further. So just a general sense of how people are feeling at the moment with all the uncertainty around, and also unemployment as well. It's still historically very low, but we are just starting to see a little bit of a pickup in unemployment. In South Staffordshire, it's just slightly higher than that as well. So potentially an indicator of where things are going, and you'd expect that as we start to enter a period of recession to unemployment to start to increase. So in summary, we are expected to go into a period of recession in 2023. Inflation is going to be a theme throughout this evening, the impacts on pay and wider prices. Interest rates starting to see a little bit more of a stabilisation. That's given us a big opportunity, actually, and you'll see that in the MTFS. And obviously the effects of unemployment that could go on and also hit us in terms of our budgets as well. I'll take any questions on the economic update before I go into the settlement, if there's any at the moment. If not, I'll move forward.
Councillor Sadler.
Thank you, Chairman. In terms of unemployment, I think it's understood that part of the effect of COVID has been a fairly major withdrawal of people from the labour market. Is that going to have any effect on us? Do we expect that to continue or to be ameliorated, please?
Please.
It's a really interesting comment. Actually, part of that driver is because of the major driver of people leaving the workforce rather than there being a lack of jobs or more employment. So it absolutely will have an effect on us in terms of our own recruitment and retention potentially, and that will be picked up as part of the HR and the work that they're doing and some of the new policies that we've put in place to tackle that. But it will be an ongoing pressure for all organisations.
Lovely, thank you, Pete. Thank you, Councillor Sadler, for your question. Members, any other questions at this stage? No, it doesn't look like it. Pete, if you want to carry on.
So in terms of the local government settlement, that was announced on just before Christmas, the 19th of December. I'm just going to pick out the main points of that, some of which affect us, some of which don't, but will in future years. And I think it's important for members to be aware of some of the main headlines. So in terms of council tax, quite key for us. Districts are still allowed to apply the higher rate of a limit of £5. What we're presenting this evening does assume that that £5 uplift has been applied without going to referendum. There has been much talk about that rate being increased to £10, but at the moment that has not been put into effect. been some changes around the business rates retention. Each year, government will inflate what we're allowed to keep. Historically, that's been in line with RPI. That was changed this year to CPI, so a little bit of an adverse effect for us there. The services grant, this was previously, if you look back to prior years MTFS, that was the service 22-23 services grant. It was a new one that was issued last year. That's been reduced. The main part of the grant last year was to compensate local authorities for the increase in national insurance. Obviously, that was reversed over the last few months, so therefore that grant has been reduced correspondingly because we don't have that national insurance pressure. The new homes bonus is a slightly unusual one for us this evening. So actually across the board, the pot for new homes bonus has been quite significantly reduced. However, when you see the figures for South Staffordshire, our new homes bonus actually is significantly larger than it has been. So for most authorities it reduced, for us it's gone up. And that's because of how that has worked. The year that dropped out of the calculation was particularly low for us. So we've actually benefited from new homes bonus, but that's an anomaly. The lower tier services grant has been removed, and that's been replaced by the minimum funding guarantee, which is the next line. We haven't actually received anything from the funding guarantee. That's guaranteed that core spending for local authorities was not lower than 3%. We didn't receive any of that grant because of the new homes bonus. So I think that's an important point to make. Next year, I would expect the new homes bonus to be lower, but us to receive some of the funding guarantee funding to balance out. And the last is really important for us in terms of the longer term planning around local government funding reform. And we've got a much clearer statement now that is highly unlikely to be implemented for at least the next 2 years, probably into the next term of new government, whatever that will look like. And even then that will take some time to work through. So in terms of our funding and what could happen around business rates, that's enabled us to be a little bit more confident in what we're planning now over the next 5 years or so. I'll pause there for any questions on the settlement before we go into the meat of this evening.
Councillor Kane.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Could somebody tell me what the cost would be if we didn't raise any council tax? What would the cost be to the council? And also, part B of one question, the new homes bonus, is it paid upon completion of a house or is it paid quarterly? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kane. Peter, would you like to answer that?
So in terms of council tax, that's worth around £200,000 a year for us. So it's £5 multiplied by our tax base, which is roughly around 39 to 40,000 homes. The second part I can take away and come back with an answer, but it would be after the home is completed. When we receive that money, whether it's paid in quarters or at the end of the year, I'll just have to check.
Lovely. Thank you for that explanation, Peter. Thank you, Councillor Kane, for the question. Any other questions at this stage, members? No, I think you have leave to carry on. So across all of what we'll present this evening, there's some key budgetary assumptions which members should be aware of and what we've planned over the next 5 years. So I say a theme for this evening will be inflationary pressures, and that has a knock-on impact on pay. The pay settlement for this financial year was a flat fee across all officers. For next year, obviously, that will be a negotiated position nationally. We have factored in for next year an average of a 5% pay award across the board. This is broadly in line with other local authorities. Some have gone at 4%, some at 6%, but on average, it's around 5%. So we're in line with thinking of our counterparties. 24-25, we've reduced that to 3%, and 25-26 onwards back to 2%. That broadly follows our assumptions around inflation and the pressures over that period. So as inflation starts to tail off, we would expect that those pay pressures to reduce. In terms of inflation pressures themselves, there's a number of factors that we build into the budgets. There's specific contractual inflation, so particularly around our digital services contracts. We might be in those contracts for 5, 6, 7 years. We know that that's fixed at the point we take the contract, what the inflationary pressure will be. We build that in as core business effectively.
There'll then be other areas across our budgets where there isn't necessarily a contractual inflationary uplift, but we know there's pressures in the market and we'll build those in. And there's other residual budgets where we'll add a nominal 2% to support those managers in managing any pressures. However, we're really conscious that at the moment it's a major pressure for us. So as part of the proposals this evening is a new budget line that's been added into our annual budget to manage any unknown inflationary pressures that will sit corporately, will not be given out to the services, but 150,000 next year, rising to £200,000 over each of the years of the MTFS. We could then allocate out on a case-by-case basis if needs be. And finally, the COVID reserve that we've had for the last 2 years, that will come to an end at the end of this year, but repurpose the balance of that and continue with our pay and inflation reserve. And we've already made reference to the assumption that council tax is increased by 5%, £5 across to Band D property, and that's for each of the years of the MTFS. So now going into each of the portfolios in turn, I'm just going to pick out the major movements from last year to this year and what those savings and pressures are. So starting with business transformation, you'll see, members, that each of the slides takes the same format. So we start at where we were back in February last year when council approved the budget, and then it's the major movements to bring us to what the proposed budget will be moving forward. And as I say, I'll pick out the pertinent points. So a line on each of the portfolios that you will see is the pay and inflation. It's across the board. Where that's significantly sizable, we'll talk through what those major drivers are, but that is across the board. Principally, the 5%, 3%, 2% that you saw earlier, that's what's reflected in that line. And of course, the in-year pay pressure. For business transformation, we've got a number of resource planning and prioritisation proposals that we've talked to you before, and we'll go through those in a moment. The structure change, you'll see this on one of the slides later on, that is just us moving budgets between one portfolio to another. So you'll see a corresponding minus 56 on another slide. So it's just moving the budgets. So the major movement for business transformation is 4 areas that came out of RPP, the bottom slide. And I'll just briefly talk through those. So cloud hosting, this is some funding that we've received from government to help prime this, but it's actually hosting some of our key council services in the cloud. So moving from an off-premise service where we've got servers in this building and hosting that in the cloud, really building our resilience should we receive any sort of cyber attack or anything like that, be able to get those core services back up and running quickly. So ongoing, that's a pressure of 25,000 over the life of the MTFS. Members will also be aware that last year you approved quite a significant investment in the customer experience programme. So new websites, new forms that will sit behind that, and we're due to go live over the next 6 to 8 weeks on that. There will be ongoing support needed for hosting the website, for keeping that up to date. We can fund that for the first year from that initial allocation that members approved last year, but then from years 2 onwards, there is that an ongoing pressure. We're also looking at our digital resilience across the board and how we can properly take effect of changes in the cyber world and the attacks that organisations like us are seeing. So as well as hosting some of our key core services in the cloud, other our services aren't yet ready to be hosted in the cloud, but we want to back up those services to the cloud. So that's what the digital resilience is. It's actually having a backup in the cloud that if we were to be attacked, we've got a backup somewhere that we can pull on very quickly in the event of a cyber attack. And lastly, the instruction of a procurement officer. We've talked at length with members about that. We have an arrangement with the county council at the moment that do our major procurements, but outside of that, it's very much left to officers to manage the day-to-day procurement, keeping a track of contract negotiations, etc. So we really feel there's a need for an in-house procurement officer to help support our managers on a day-to-day basis, to be the link back into the county council. That should, in future years, come forward also with some savings as well, as we can start to amalgamate contracts and start to really achieve best value across some of our areas. Moving on to community services, quite a number of areas in here, members, which I'll take you through. This is where you're really going to see the biggest effect of pay and inflation. So there is a separate slide on that, which I'll come on to. But the major figure in there isn't pay, it is inflation from our waste contracts, which we'll go through in a moment. There's some small business as usual adjustments, some further RPP proposals. So first of all, looking at the RPP proposals for community services, we spoke to members just before Christmas on this. A number of proposals, digital only communications being one. That's every other year we issue calendars around the bins. The proposal is that we move to a digital only from years 24, 25 onwards. That we introduce a bin replacement charge. This wouldn't be a profit making, this would be purely to cover our costs for administering and delivering any new bin. That wouldn't be if someone's bin is damaged by the lorry eating the bin or anything like that, but that would be if they wanted an additional bin, there would be a charge that would come with that. And then we've put a number of options together that we're going to work through over the next 12 months or so. So charging for developers, so when there's been new housing developments, that initial supply of bins and containers for that development, we can introduce a charge. With the removal of bin stickers and managing that through another way, and also reviewing our fees and charges for bulky collections. At the moment, there's a nominal £10,000 saving across the board for that, as the services work through detailed proposals and actually see what's possible. So I would expect in future years MTFS that to come back and that figure to increase as we start to have an evidence base for some of that. And finally, our income from members will be aware that there's a crematoria being developed and built. There's an income stream associated with that we are looking to repurpose potentially with the county council and do bigger projects, but the core income expectations have now been factored in to the MTFS. Looking at some of the BAU changes within community services, across the board, you'll see changes in our fees and charges that we would review annually anyway. So around our cemetery income, we feel there's an opportunity there with our fees and charges. And there's been a number of other changes. I won't pick up all of them, but if members wish to go into them, we can do. But probably the biggest movement here is the clarity around our chargeable green waste. So we had planned for that income stream to be removed because of changes in legislation. Towards the end of last year, we got more clarity that wouldn't be the case and we would be able to continue to charge. So last year we pulled it out to be prudent in the MTFS. That's why it looks a little bit odd to see a minus 600, but effectively that's putting that income stream back into the budget towards the end of the MTFS period. And there's other minor movements around recycling, etc., and our ongoing works at Baggeridge, etc. And finally, for the big area for community services that we were talking about is the inflationary pressures. We also include in here the inflation across the community hub and the electricity contracts that we're all facing in our private lives as well. That's really a major impact for us over the life of the MTFS. We have entered recently into a basket of goods with the county council to secure best value on how we purchase our electricity, but even with that, it's still a significant pressure. And the other pressure, which is towards the bottom of that paragraph, that table, is around the BIFA contract and those waste pressures. So basically they're in line with CPI at March each year. We know that March 23 CPI will probably be around the 10% mark, quite significant savings. And once that inflationary pressure's in, it's then in for the life of that contract. So that's really a major driver for community services. Moving on to partnership services. The major change here, while there's some small pay and inflation movements, are on business as usual, and we'll go on to those on the next slide. So those business as usual changes, we are part of what's called the PSAA. They appoint our external auditors. There's been much press over recent months and years of auditor fees, etc. That review has been concluded over the last few months, and it's been decided that audit fees need to increase to make that market sustainable. So we really don't have much choice on what the fee will be, but it is set nationally to try and achieve best value. But we've recognised that those increases in audit fees will flow through. As we do on our fees and charges, we also uplift our fees and charges we charge to some of our tenants and our commercial properties, and that's what the income inflation line is there moving forward. And the one-off impacts, which is a real major movement in this portfolio. There was a fire at one of our commercial sites 2 years ago. We are not expecting to have that commercial property back up and running until the end of this year. So we've had to remove that income line just to be prudent. Hopefully we can keep that income in a little bit earlier, but we've taken a prudent approach and pulled it out for the next financial year. Moving on to planning and business enterprise. Again, paying inflation across those staffing budgets there. Some small business as usual adjustments and some RPP movements as well, which we'll go on to on the next slide. So in terms of the RPP, there's 3 major movements here. The request from the services to have 2 new posts, a conservationist and a Section 106 officer. Currently, those roles are being done by 1 officer on effectively a part-time, half the week spent on 106 type activities, half the week on conservation type activities. That's really not working for the service. So the proposal here is that we create 2 full-time posts to focus on 106 and conservation. Over the last 12 months or so, members, you agreed last February to invest quite strongly in climate change and the staffing around that area. It's felt widely that that's been a success. So the next movement is to make those adjustments permanent to those members of staff moving forward. And the last area is that there's been a review of the planning fee income. We've historically overachieved, so this really is right sizing the budget over the next 5 years. So a review of the planning fee income, which is a benefit to the MTFS over that period. The one small BAU adjustment is the recruitment of an ecologist. That was approved by council in November, I believe, at a special council meeting. We currently have an outsourced service that we can buy in. So this was the recruitment of our own in-house ecologist, but that was approved by yourselves back at the end of last year. Moving forward to regulatory services, no real movements here, some small pay and inflation and some small business as usual adjustments, and they are principally around taking a conservative view around some of the income assumptions towards the end of the MTFS. As we start to move forward, we expect a bit more clarity, but there's no major areas of movement that I need to bring to members' attention on this slide. Welfare services, there's been a number of changes here, principally around the BAU, which we'll come on to on the next slide. You can see the corresponding structure change as we saw in the first slide earlier. So that's moving budgets from this area into our transformation portfolio. And again, some pay and inflation. So picking up the BAU, these were approved by council also. So a number of staffing changes across customer services and our welfare services as well. Again, members, you'll be aware of the pressures that those services have faced over the last 6 to 12 months and the additional demands upon them from a number of government schemes that have been offered to other countries. So that's been bringing demand into that team that's been reflected principally in the staffing areas there. That ends those areas. If we look to central budgets, so these are principally finance and corporate budgets. There's quite a number of significant changes, many of which members will be aware of and we've spoken about before. But last year we decided to take some borrowing. It was catch-up borrowing from our capital programme. We did secure that at historically low interest rates. What this line is, the first line, has enabled us to readjust that budget. So we planned to take the borrowing at around 3 to 3.5%. We actually secured that at 1.5%. So we're able to offer that saving back to the MTFS. Also, if you remember where we started this evening, we talked about some of those increased interest rates. And while that has a negative effect on the economy, For us, actually, we've been able to invest some of our surplus funds and achieve a greater return. So we've actually been able to contribute quite a significant amount to the MTFS because of those balances and where we're able to invest those funds. We've still taken quite a prudent view into years 2, 3, 4 onwards of the MTFS, expecting those rates to start to come back down again. So there may be further opportunity if those rates sustain. Also, we've looked at our MRP effectively that's our minimum revenue provision for members. As a quick reminder, effectively when we take borrowing, there's the interest and the principal. This effectively is the principal part of that, and how long we take that, we factor that depreciation or the principal repayment over the accounts for. There's been a number of changes, but the main change is that we can fund our leisure refurbishments from capital receipts. So we haven't funded it from borrowing, we fund it from capital receipts, which means that we can adjust our principal repayments and offer a saving forward to the MTFS. It will disappear in a minute and I'll press the button again to bring it back. Just let it die and then I'll put it back on. There we go. You're doing very well. 2 seconds, it is coming through, members. There we go. Again, we talked about some of the changes as part of the settlement back last November. That was New Homes Bonus, so we've benefited quite significantly for next year for New Homes Bonus. We've also put in a years 2 and 3 New Homes Bonus. I don't actually think it will come out as New Homes Bonus. It will probably come as part of the funding guarantee, but either way, one will be offset by the other. So we do think that we can be a little bit more robust in our income assumptions, certainly over the next 2 years. What we've also done corporately is take a review of our business rates and what we're able to retain. If you remember, there was a lot of uncertainty for a number of years around that business rate reset, how hard we would be hitting South Staffordshire, and that would significantly reduce. Given the announcements over the recent months that certainly will be pushed out for this period of this Parliament and probably early into the next, and also looking at some of the improvements we've got in the rateable values, etc., we've been able to basically revise that income assumption quite heavily. So that's really added quite a lot into the MTFS period. So that's a real help to us as well. Council tax is purely movements in the base. So that's catch up as we build new homes, etc. That's the only change there in the council tax. It's not the £5, just for clarity. And also the last line there, the application of earmarked reserves. In prior years where our business rates have overachieved, that sits in a reserve, we're now able to release some of that back to the general fund, and that will also contribute and help support the MTFS as well. So quite some significant savings there. So what does all that do for us as the authority? So the first line is what the position we were in February when council approved the current budget. So what we plan the gap to be in each of those years. And the second line updated as December, that's following the settlement. You can see it's an improved position year on year. So our gap has actually got less, principally because of revisions in those income assumptions and also the contribution from our earmarked reserves around those business rates. What that does for the general fund, it's improved our position from last February. So we've got a healthier opening balance. However, as you can see, we are still utilising our general fund reserves to the tune of 1.7 million next year, 1.3 the year after. So we're still calling on our reserves to balance our position, which obviously isn't sustainable in the long term. However, we are in a strong position, unlike many authorities, to be able to do that to balance our budget. So the summary for me really is it's an improved position from last February when members approved the budget. The gap has been lowered. CLT and the organisation, we're working over the next 12 months to look how we lower that gap again and draw on our reserves less. But obviously, we've got a 3.5 year balance position with the use of those reserves. The big driver is pay and inflation. Just to put that some sort of context, members, that's about an £8 million worth of pressures that have gone in since you saw the budget last February. £8 million of pressures that we weren't expecting just from paying inflation alone. So if we didn't have that, you can see that the MTFS would look significantly better. Government funding in the short term is much clearer for us, and that's helped us to revise those income assumptions. We're still being cautious, but we certainly are able to be a little bit more confident in that short term. We will be using our reserves to balance that position, but over this period, while it buys us some time, taking on that commercial approach, which we've talked about at length over the last few months, trying to increase our income streams, as well as looking at our cost base and how we can reduce that in a sustainable way. So the summary is that we are presenting this evening a balanced budget through to 25-26 and into 26-27 with the use of those reserves. And I'm happy to take any questions, members.
Thank you, Pete, for that. I think I saw Councillor Fisher indicating first, and then we'll go to Councillor Allen. Councillor Fisher.
Thank you, Chairman. I've had a glance over this over the weekend, and these may be really stupid questions. I'm sure you correct me if they are. But the first one I'll ask, I've got three to ask. The first one on page 10 of the agenda, so table 6. It's got the reported deficit of February 2022, and it's got the figures 2389, 1977, 2887, etc. Obviously, they for the years 21, 22, 22, 23, 23, 24. But then on page 9, table 5, it says those figures are for 23, 24, 24, 25, 25, 26. Is that right? Am I reading that right?
Thank you, Councillor Fisher.
Sorry, I'm just checking the report myself, so give me 1 second. So in 23-24, the annual deficit surplus 2389. Then you're referring to table 2. Is that correct?
Yeah, between table 5 and table 6.
I'll take that away and check it too. It could be there may be a slight discrepancy in the column headings, but we'll double check and reissue if needs be.
Thank you for looking into that, Pete. Councillor Fisher, you've got 2 extra questions. You want to go through them now and then they're out of the way.
Thank you, Chair. My second one is regarding table 2 on page 8. So this one, it's got the forecast deficit from 22-23 to 23-24, decreases by about 900k. Then it decreases again by 450k, then increases 650k, and then it jumps more than 2.1 million into 26-27, and then increases again 450k. So that 2.1 million is a massive spike, which got my attention. So I've tried to look into why that is, which wasn't as easy as I hoped. I did see the application of the more than 3 million in earmarked reserves. I've seen them on the slide, as in note 17, but for business rate revaluations. But as it says in note 15 and 7.16, business rates should be stable for the next few years, and in the latter years, West Midlands Interchange and other key strategic sites will further assist, but have not been yet been factored into this MTFS. So why are we choosing to apply this more than 3 million in reserves now instead of waiting until later on in the MTFS when there's less certainty, as you've already highlighted?
Please.
Thank you, Councillor Fisher. So you're absolutely right in terms of what causes that spike is principally our prudent view of our income assumptions in those outer years. We would expect them to be stronger than that, so for the reasons we've put in the report. How we apply those reserves from the business rates effectively that we're now releasing back, we could do that in 1 year, say next year, or any of the years of the MTFS, or we could spread it over a period. So at the moment, we've decided to spread it over the first 3 years. I would expect in that period, actually, that reserve to build up again to help us in the outer years again. But because of what we know what the balance is, we've just taken a prudent view and apportioned that over the first 3 years. We could do it towards the latter part of the MTFS, but it wouldn't actually alter at what point our general fund reserves fall into a position which is unsustainable, which is that 3.5 year period. So it doesn't affect the trajectory or the timeline to the general fund impact.
Lovely. Thank you for that explanation, Pete. That's really helpful. Councillor Fisher, your third and final
Yeah.
question.
Yeah, thank you. This on page 16, so table 8. The council tax assumptions, obviously that shows the council tax rising the maximum £5 year on year to 27.28. In the assumed tax base of Band D properties between 23 and 24 to 24 and 25, it increases 711. In 24 to 25, 25, 26, just 282, and then 200 for the other years. Is that not a little low, considering our latest 5-year housing supply minimum is 253? And then what's driving that drop of more than 700 to less than 300 over the 5-year period?
Thank you for the question, Councillor Fisher. Pete.
So we'll get a fuller response in terms of what the base of that assumption is, but that's driven by our housing team and their predictions on the current plan that's in place. So on their trajectory, we've taken those figures, but I can certainly take away and give you a fuller response as to what is behind those figures.
Lovely. Thank you, Pete. Thank you for that.
Thanks, Chair. But if I could just come back on those, and obviously I can speak to you after, but could you put more detail for them questions by email to me so I can just look into it more deeply on the response? Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you for that, Councillor Fisher. Is that okay, Pete? That's great. And could that be circulated to all members so we can all benefit from that? Thank you. Councillor Allen now.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Firstly, Pete, could you explain the variation in the digital resilience figures? Along that line in the looking at the digital resilience, there's a big variation in figures. I've lost the table. Sorry. Page 24. I think, yes.
Thank you, Councillor Allen. Just give us time to get to that bit as well. Sorry, Councillor Allen, just turn your microphone off, please.
Oh,
thank you.
Councillor Allen, can you just confirm what table you're looking at? Is it in Appendix 3? And is that under the business transformation? Sorry, can you just clarify the question again now that I found the...
yes, there's a variation in the digital resilience figures, which I didn't understand. I wondered if it was reflecting on purchase of more computers, or whether it's reflecting on something to do with the access to the cloud.
Yeah, so thank you, Councillor Allen. Understood. So that was actually picking from the slides. So that's coming in 2 formats. So first of all, we have some on-premise servers at the moment that sit in the community hub. Part of that will be moving those servers into the cloud. So it's the hosting for those cloud servers and moving off-premise. Other ones is just a backup in the cloud. So effectively, it's the investment, the revenue investment, because it's not capital, it's not our asset, in those cloud technologies. And also some of the work to get that data migrated into the cloud, or for those applications to sit on the cloud. So it's the investment that's needed there.
Yes, Councillor Allen, come back.
Thank you. Then I'd like to say that I actually don't agree with taking out the COVID funding yet. I'm saying that because there is a new variant, as we all know, and sadly, I do see this continuing. I think it would be a mistake to rely on that to build our reserves. So I don't agree with actually collapsing that fund yet. It would be very nice to say yes, but I think that's not sensible or realistic. My other question is about the sweeper charges, which are in the, I think they're in the leisure stuff, the street scene and the sweeper charges. I'm not really very happy about the way in which the maintenance of the footpaths and the certainly in our area is really poor. And I think from my point of view, I'm hearing that from other people, leaves and drains and the other things, that some of which are obviously a highway responsibility. But there are a number of places in our village particularly where we've got staging around the lake, where we've got footpaths that are covered in leaves at the moment, and the sweepers seem to be one in existence for the whole of the district at the moment. My other thought for you is that if the increase in planning income is due to our new housing that's in the local plan, how are we going to reassess that if we're changing the local plan? And I know that's a really difficult question to answer because we don't know yet from the central government what's going to happen about that. But clearly there'll be a loss of planning income if that's what happens.
Thank you, Councillor Allen, for those questions, those points. I think the point on COVID funding is more than a question necessarily to respond to, but can you respond to the other bits, Pete?
If I just come back on point of clarity on the COVID funding, so it's not that it's going from our budgets, it's to bolster the pay and inflation reserve as it's proposed at the moment. So that funding wouldn't disappear from the authority, but badged under another name. You'd also may be aware that government are putting quite a lot of focus on local authority reserves and where they're holding that funding. And there's some talk of clawing back that funding that wasn't used for COVID. So potentially members may want to think about that and reflect on that again for the repurposing of it in terms of its name. In terms of the sweeper contract as well, picking up on that point, that's an inflationary pressure that's baked into the contract that has to be executed, but take on board your points around the concerns in your local area. Just trying to think what the final question.
The planning income.
In terms of the planning income that we forecasted here, this is not based on any proposals within what could be a new local plan if and when that's approved. So this is based on current assumptions, and it's effectively right sizing our current budget. So if we look at our in-year monitoring, we tend to overachieve on our planning income per what the budget is set at currently. So this is purely reflecting bringing the budget into line with what we currently achieve on an annual basis. If and when any plans change as part of next year's MTFS proposals, those budget assumptions will be reviewed as well.
Lovely, thank you, Pete, for those explanations. Councillor Kane.
Thank you, Chairman. Page 22, Appendix 2, Business Transformation. Community Services. Why is there such a large difference between 38 and 88 for the 2 years? And do we need to appoint a senior 106 officer when we could just appoint a 106 officer? And is the appointment permanent or temporary? And if temporary, for how long? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kane. Pete.
So the first point, your crematoria fees and charges, that's reflective of a part year impact. So we're not expecting from the 1st of April for those fees and charges to uplift. So that's why it's 38 and then it grows in those outer years as the full year effect takes place. Those 2 posts are currently proposed as permanent appointments. It is described as a senior 106 officer. That potentially is a typo, but effectively it's a dedicated member of staff to look at 106. Where that grading falls will obviously go through the HR and job evaluation, but they are permanent and ongoing posts as proposed.
Lovely. Thank you, Pete. Thank you, Councillor Kane. Councillor Bourke next.
Thank you, Chairman. It's just a general question, really. I've raised this a few times in the past regarding the level of reserve. Standing currently at 8.3 on page 8, table 4. I've also mentioned this to you, Pete, before in the past, where we've budget we get each year. It's a medium-term financial position, but at the end of the 5 years, we're always told every year we're going to use up all our reserve. But every year when we come back, our figures are better, or a lot better than they were just 12 months ago, never mind 24 months ago. As an example of that, if like table 4, page 8, the current reserves are 8.3. If we went back a few years to say 2015, the reserves then were 4.4. So we've got a 4 million increase in our reserves. In 2015, we were told by the end of the 5-year plan, we're going to use up all our reserves. So we didn't. We're now in much healthier position today. I know looking forward, it's not so healthy on these figures. Then if you go to page 18, we have the general reserve of 9.2 and the earmark reserve of 8.2, given a total of 17.5 million. Back on those figures on 2015, our total unusable reserves was 7.2 million, so it's 10 million more, which is like 150% increase in the reserve. You know, we're trying to plan. It's difficult to plan for any future investments. Councillor Allen mentioned about sweepers and whatever, you know, and it's difficult to plan when we're looking at having no money every year in a 5-year plan. But no matter how far we go back, and we could go back, I've got figures here going back to 2006, the same predictions were given, but we've got lots more money in the pot. We're asking the residents to pay more, but we're not necessarily going to give them more of a service. I just wondered if you could explain why, for instance, I know you've not been here all that time, but why we would have a 150% increase in the general reserve over about an 8-year period.
Thank you, Councillor Bourke. That's a really interesting point.
Thank you for the question. A number of factors, if I can may come back on. One, obviously each year, principally because of inflation and pay, you'll notice that the net expenditure of the authority increases. So actually going back in prior years, the net expenditure of this authority would have been significantly less, and therefore you'd expect the reserves to be at a lower balance. But the need for those increasing reserves, as our total expenditure gets bigger and we get a bigger authority, obviously will change. So we could look back at the percentages. Effectively, however, what we're saying here is that if we don't take any corrective action, then we will be in a financially difficult position. Clearly, over those periods of years, corrective action has been taken, which has meant that that time limit can keep being pushed out. If we look to this financial year and what we presented to members in February, we said that we would need to call around £1 million out of our general fund reserve. At the moment, we're still planning on that £1 million being pulled out of the reserve. So our reserve balance from the 1st of April in 22 will be £1 million lower at the 31st of March 23. So we are starting to call on the reserves, reflective of the pressures that we're facing at the moment. If we continue in that vein over the course of the next 5 years, then obviously we have a problem. But what we're saying tonight is corrective action will be taken to push out that timescale. Also, the final point really is reflective of there's a number of one-off events that have happened in those periods, additional government grants from COVID particularly, and others over that time period, which couldn't have been forecast. They were expected and windfalls. So there's quite a number of factors as to why that reserve level will move over that period. But really, corrective action has been taken. It will continue to be taken to ensure that we don't actually achieve a negative position on our bank account effectively.
Thank you, Pete. I think the point being made there is the work never ends, does it? It's something that keeps going. Thank you, Councillor Bourke, for your question. Members, any other questions? Councillor Cope, and then I'll come to Councillor Allen.
Yes, thank you. Pete, this is about pension contributions on page 29, second line down. It's a good pension if you're working for local authority because defined benefits. But it's getting more and more costly, and I can see the projection is for future years quite a big increase. What was the actuarial value? I know the county run this scheme, but is it massively now underfunded because of the market performances at the moment?
Thank you, Councillor Cope. Pete?
Sorry.
So happy to share outside of this meeting the actuarial valuation. Actually, that's been recently undertook, and it was actually performing quite strongly. Obviously, they won't just react to current market events because it's a longer term investment plan. It is performing quite better and quite healthy. Certainly, as we came out of COVID, the markets significantly improved. But happy to share the report with you separately.
Thank you, Pete, for that. Councillor Allen.
Thank you. Just a brief general question, please, about investment. I was looking for a line about the invested amount that we've got, since we've got reserves of £8 million. Either it's me or I couldn't find it in here, or a general comment about it, please.
Thank you, Councillor Allen. Pete?
So our reserves are effectively a snapshot in time, but our cash balances will vary on a day-to-day basis. So at any point in time, we might be holding anywhere between 10 and 20 million pounds in investments in cash. That's not reflective necessarily of our reserves, although obviously reserves make up a significant portion of that, but we also collect from council tax and our business rates, etc. And up to the period before we pay over those precepts, we'll hold that money. So on this current month, we'd be holding around £20 million, and that would be diversified across our portfolio, some in money market funds, some in reasonably short-term investments around 3 to 6 months, in line with our treasury management strategy. But I'd probably share with you and direct you to the treasury update that's on a quarterly basis to see what we invest and our cash balances.
Lovely, thank you, Pete, for that. Members, any other questions? Can't see anybody signalling, so it looks like it's the end of questions. Anything else to add, Pete? No, nothing else. In which case, on this item, we can move to debate, if anybody wishes to debate what we've heard this evening. Councillor Fisher.
Thank you, Chairman. Obviously, I haven't been on this council as long as most in this room. But in the last 4 years, I have obviously noticed a pattern very similar to Councillor Burke. We always seem to have a cliff edge at the end of the MTFS, but it never seems to materialise. For example, similar to Councillor Burke, I did something similar in February 2018, 5 years ago. He said this year, 22-23, we would have no reserves and a deficit of 1.37 million in the general fund. When in reality, this MTFS, we will have 8.36 million surplus. So that's a swing of nearly 10 million. And this happens every time. And in 2018, obviously that didn't account for the pandemic or the hyperinflation that we're now seeing. And we're still in a better position. So I struggle to understand why it always seems so far out. What I do understand is its political advantages, depending on the agenda at the time. When the council want to spend money, we point to now, we point to the healthy accounts. When we want to bring in additional charges or council tax rises or pay rises, we point to the cliff edge in 5 years' time to justify them. This just doesn't sit right with me, and I'm no expert in local government finances, but I do feel a little hoodwinked by it. So until I understand it more fully, for transparency, I'm just going to have to abstain from voting on it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fisher, for your contribution to debate phase. Members, anybody else? Councillor Allen, I see next.
I just want to speak in support of the budget. I think it's very good not to impose greater burdens on our residents. And I'm sure they'll be relieved to hear about the £5. And to say that, like Councillor Fisher, not having a massive background in this, but in other areas I do, I think this is a good balanced budget, and I want to reflect that to our officers and to the council in general. I think the residents have been very concerned about what might be happening this year. They've had emails from the Police and Crime Commissioner. They've been expecting large budget increases from other areas, and they'll be relieved to find this budget is staying as it is for family properties. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Allen. Members, anybody else wish to contribute to debate? Councillor Adams.
Thank you, Chair. I'm relatively comfortable just that have been put. People asking questions. Has any of the opposition parties any numbers to give us a budget in their view at all?
Thank you, Councillor Adams. At debate stage, there isn't really a response from the top table, but your comments are certainly noted there. Members, any other contributions? Councillor Cope.
Yeah, I'd just like to say, I don't think South Staff's residents appreciate how low our tax budget is. It's, I believe, about the 5th lowest in the country. And I don't think we've publicised that enough, because what tends to happen is once the county and the fire services and all the other contributions, everybody, our residents think council taxes are going up. And I really do think we ought to publicise the fact that we are lean and mean in the way we do things and still offer good services. And it's the 5th lowest if it's still the same in the country. I think we need to tell our residents more about that, because they really do think, you know, that we're shoving the taxes up, and it's other authorities that do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cope, for your comments. Are there members, anybody else wishing to contribute to the debate? I cannot see anybody signalling. So if you're all questioned and debated out, can I just get your assent if you feel that we have suitably scrutinised this agenda item? Lovely. Thank you, everybody. We will move on. Oh, sorry, Councillor Fisher, I missed you there.
No, just if that's a vote, can I be recorded as abstention?
Thank you, Councillor Fisher. So that will be put in the minutes, Councillor Fisher. There we are. So that moves us on to item 5 for this evening. Something of a come down after all of that meaty detail, I think. The work programme. Lorraine.
I'll try not to take offence at that. Members, just very, very briefly, the work programme, really, the report is just saying that we're on track to deliver the work programme against the agenda. And as always, members, if you do have any suggestions or additions, then please do let the chairman know, and we can look to incorporate that into the future work programme. Thank you.
Lovely, thank you, Lorraine. I didn't mean anything by that. I simply meant that we'd get through it very quickly. I mean, and we have. Members, any questions in relation to the report on the work programme? Doesn't look like it. I think that vindicates me a little bit. Anybody wish to debate the work programme? No, lovely. In which case, thank you, members. That is our agenda for this evening. You've been wonderful as ever, and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you, everybody.